Hello everybody, I like to think I am a man of my word, and earlier this year, after I filmed the incredible Bristol fighter, I asked you all if you wanted to see some more, and the answer was a resounding yes. So today, I'm delivering upon my promise. That's right, we've got not just one, but two of these incredible British beauties on the channel this week. A fine pair of Bristols, if you will. In my last video, it was this, the elegant road racer, the 404. And today, it's the brutal V8 cruiser, the 411. The history of Bristol cars can easily be summarised into three distinct eras, each defined by the engine the company was using. The most recent, of course, featured the ill-fated fighter with its Dodge Viper V10. But Bristol's first outputs had a BMW-derived six-cylinder, which in the 1940s and early 50s was a very good engine of its time. But as post-war development at other manufacturers continued, it became very much outgunned and out-fashioned. So, the dawn of the 1960s saw the arrival of a new power plant, an American V8. From 1961 until the arrival of the fighter, lift the bonnet on any Bristol and you're going to find a nice and meaty Chrysler V8. This is a 1972 411, the model having been introduced in 1969 and being phased out in 1976. For me, this really is the archetypal Bristol. During its original production run, there were 5 different series of the 411. This is what's known as a Series 6, and it's essentially a factory resto mod. These were built by Bristol themselves in the late 2000s when the fighter was in development and then on sale, as a way of people who wanted to buy an old Bristol being able to get one as though they were ordering it new. So, when you bought one of these, instead of the old 6.2 or 6.5 litre V8, you instead got a much newer Chrysler V8 displacing 5.9 litres with fuel injection. You also got a more modern 4-speed auto box with an automatic overdrive versus the old 3-speed. The brakes were uprated, a Quaife limited slip differential was fitted, a thorough restoration and cosmetic overhaul were also part of the package, and you could choose to have your car either as it left the factory 40 years prior or in any combination of colour and materials that you chose. In its day, the 411 was considered a fine handling car, and it didn't lack for pace either, because even when new, this would have made around 330 odd horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque. This Series 6 makes near enough 400 horsepower. Bristol cars are also one of those wonderful breeds that almost always come with a story. This particular car was commissioned by a gentleman and specified by his wife. Unfortunately, before they could take delivery of it, she passed away. So he said if it was okay, he didn't want to take the car anymore. It then went on to its current owner, who took it on the Pan American Rally, a 10,500 mile journey that was completed in just 7 weeks. So it's a car that's really been used, driven and enjoyed. I must say, the interior of this car took me by surprise. It's not at all what I was expecting. Though it has many classic elements, including all of the switches being the same type, just with different writing on, it looks, feels and smells brand new in here. If you're thinking these seats look out of place, that's because they are. These are actually modern day Cobras that have been trimmed to match the rest of the interior. The originals are sealed in a plastic bag and will come with the car when it's sold to its next owner. The dash still looks very much classic with these beautiful cream Smith's gauges. You have a 3-spoke motor litre wheel, unlike the earlier 2 spokes you got in many other Bristols. You have a modern day Alpine stereo, old school looking HVAC, and actually a reasonable amount of space. You can get 4 adults in here. And naturally, this being an old car, you have 4 seats, so you have 4 ashtrays. Really, this is a place I could actually see myself spending some time. And if you wanted a classic to use on a daily basis, I can see why this would appeal. The 404 was very much a race car of its time, and the sort of thing you could expect to be bought by people called Archie or Laird Mountbatten. This is the sort of thing you'd buy if your name was Knuckles or Arthur Daly. To me, it's also the last truly pretty Bristol ever made, the possible exception there being the Fighter. All of the other cars that came after this were, to me, very, very poor looking things with odd panels and flat sides designed to be cheaper to produce. This still has enough of that classic 1960s feel about it, and comparisons with the contemporary Jaguar or Jensen aren't all that far-fetched. If you prefer your classics as they left the factory, an original 411 can be had for around £40,000. In the rarefied world of classic cars today, that's actually quite good value for money. Naturally, this commands quite a bit more. It's currently up for sale at £125,000 with SLJ Hackett, who very kindly have allowed me to drive it. So let's see what it's like. Hopping out of the 404 into this is what I imagine it would feel like to get out of a Sopwith Camel and get into a private Learjet. This really is a different way to travel, and a marvellous one at that. I have to confess, I'm a little bit in love with this car. Sure, there are a few things wrong with it. That 400 horsepower claim may or may not be accurate. As you might imagine, trying to get numbers for a Bristol is somewhat difficult. Trying to get accurate numbers, near impossible. Even if they were accurate at the time, they may not be now. In any case, that 4-speed automatic, considering it was put in this car only about 10 years ago, is kinda tragic. If they just put a more modern 5-speeder in there, say like the old Mercedes unit, I think that would have done this car the world of good. That being said, I do like the approach that Bristol took with this car. With Restomods, it's very easy to take things so far that when you arrive at your destination, you can't help but wonder, maybe you should have just started with something else instead. Here, though there is much about it that feels modern, the interior is lovely, the seats absolutely fantastic, you do still get the sense this is as much 1970s car as it is noughties car, particularly in the way that it goes around a bend and especially in the way that it stops. The brakes are easily the most sketchy part of this car because there is a frightening amount of dead travel before the pedal actually starts to feed back and the car slow down. The overall stopping power is also very much hampered by the tyres. The brakes themselves are nice big healthy looking AP racing items with grooved discs, but the tyres are shocking. Allow me to demonstrate. See what I mean? This is not a modern performer. It's still, in the way it grips, a 1970s car. I personally, given the amount of go that it's now got, would have been tempted to put at least more modern rubber on. The suspension, I don't actually have all that many issues with. It's very, very comfortable and it suits the car down to a T. I appreciate the narrow proportions. Though in period this was how many cars were, this was always part of the Bristol design philosophy. Even the Fighter, the final car Bristol ever made, was somewhat narrow compared to its contemporaries, and when you're on a tiny little country road, it makes a lot of sense. That bonnet is absolutely gargantuan, yet you can see virtually all of it, making this car very, very easy to place. The power steering is nice and light, has a little texture coming through it, but suits the character of this car. As you might imagine, very, very different to the 404. Even the Smith's gauges down here are behaving themselves. None of the needles are flailing about the place as they probably did in the 70s. There's even, I believe, a modicum of air conditioning. It's toasty warm outside, but I'm doing pretty okay in here. This motor-liter wheel is absolutely beautiful in the hand. In fact, I wish the 404 had something like it. That's got a comically large, very typical 50s item. Pulling away at a junction is easy, the car responds crisply, and, as you might imagine, of a nice big lazy American V8, the car's all about the torque rather than the top-end power. Though I criticise it, the gearbox is reasonably quick to respond when you put your foot down, and with its automatic overdrive means that when you're doing about 70 on the motorway, the car is doing only some 1800 RPM. In fact, most of the time that I've driven this, I've not even taken it north of 3000. It feels simply unnecessary. And back to 3. Oh, this is absolutely majestic. Visibility is also excellent thanks to a combination of mirrors that actually work and paper-thin A, B and C pillars. You know something? I could actually see somebody using this as a daily driver. You've got reasonable space in the back seats, and the boot is very generous too. The overall level of fit, finish, panel gaps, quality of materials, the woods, the leathers, the whole lot is all really quite impressive. Considering Bristol would have been working on a budget a fraction that of many other companies, I'm genuinely impressed at the level of fit and finish that they've achieved here. Jaguar currently run a program where you can buy essentially a new E-Type from them or take something like your old XJ back to them. I've seen their creations, in particular one they did for Nico McBrain from Iron Maiden. It's spectacular. However, I also know these cars come with spectacular price tags. This, at £125,000, seems like kinda reasonable value for money, and that's before you factor in the rarity of it. Even better, because of the way that these cars were made, you may think that one of the big issues with buying one is getting parts. But most of the parts in here are naturally pinched from somewhere else, and anything that isn't can be remade. When I did the fighter video, I had a look around the workshop at SLJ Hackett, and they have a thriving business restoring these cars and the older stuff like the 404. Fact is, anything that was originally handmade, you can make again. So out the back they've got a full machine shop. Anything and everything they can't get, they can make. Which is very good news for anybody concerned about what a car might be like to own over the long term. What's the turning circle like? Actually, quite good. Bit of quiet road, let's give it some beans. Yeah, it doesn't exactly rush for the horizon. Didn't really even get up to the speed limit there. The last car I drove with an engine like this, making allegedly this amount of power, was the old 1968 Dodge Charger, and that felt pokier, I must confess. Though in the Bristol's defence, this car feels much more modern. Obviously, some of it is, but not all. To drive, the Charger was still a little bit woolly around the edges, although the best example of an American classic that I've experienced. This does feel a step on. This feels closer to stuff like the Jensen Interceptor, the Ferrari 330, and other cars like that I've driven of the period. I'd love to say this would be far better with a nice manual in it, but honestly, I don't know where exactly you would put it, particularly with these nice armrests in here. And I just don't think it would suit the character of the car. I certainly don't think it will make it any faster. Humorously, if you look at the pedal box, you'd actually think this was a manual. The footrest, for some reason, looks almost exactly like a clutch, but it's not. Oh, I am absolutely loving this car, and I think the 411 is a very special Bristol because this must be one of the very last ever made that could genuinely compete with its contemporaries. Until the Fighter came along, all of the cars that followed this didn't really move the game on all that much. First off, they became considerably uglier. Secondly, underneath, they were no more advanced in 2000 than they were in 1970. So by the time I was paying attention to cars, Bristol were almost a bit of a joke. And that's a shame. The reality is that other companies like Rover, Jaguar learned how to build cars in great quantity, and when they did that, they benefited from economies of scale. I think for Bristol it was a combination of lack of funds and I think reluctance to follow those trends that kept them where they were. I'm sure for their customers that was always part of the appeal, but for your regular car buyer, come even probably the 1980s, Bristol was very much a relic of the past. This would still have compared favourably to your Jaguar or Rover of the day. In fact, I have recent experience of a Rover P5B, and this certainly feels a lot better screwed together and more upmarket. Even better, now you are going to view this like a 50-year-old car. Because it's not trying to pretend to be new, you're going to forgive it many of its failings. And as mentioned, if you enter Jaguar and ask them to build you something similar to this, they're going to charge you a lot more for it. And this will always be the rarer option. Bristol now, more than ever, is likely to appeal to the petrolhead that's looking for something very, very different. And with this, I think they really do have something that if you wanted to, you could use every day. Are they my skid marks there? So then, I hope you've enjoyed this little mini-series with a fabulous pair of Bristols, the 404, and one of my new favourite classic cars, the Bristol 411 Series 6. Thanks to you for watching. A huge thank you to Anthony and Damani who've helped me with filming today. If you don't know who they are, check out their channel, Sports and Touring, and my second channel where you'll see them a lot more regularly. For now though, all that remains to be said is a huge thanks to SLJ Hackett for lending us this car, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and even if you have, make sure you've checked the bell icon so you'll be notified of every new video. I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.